just give you a short introduction, ma'am.
I hope within another 5-7 minutes, we'll settle down. But
Okay.
I'll request you all to just clearly, just patiently and keenly observe the small video that Professor Sharma is going to play for you all, and then we'll take the session from there on. Sharma sir, please वो video play कर दीजिए.
Yes, ma'am. First of all, we will give you introduction and then we will start the video, ma'am.
हाँ जी ठीक है.
Okay, ma'am. So I request Professor Richa Jain to give the brief introduction of ma'am.
Morning to one and all. Today, on day 4 of our FDP, we are having our first keynote lecture with us from Dr. Sushma Guleria ma'am. Ma'am is assistant professor at NIDM Delhi, PhD in disaster management. She worked on World Bank project on school environmental education in India with the Ministry of Environment and Forest, Government of India. She is also the recipient of the World Bank Young Research Grant Award for Disaster Risk Reduction for the year 2005-2006. Currently looks after the Center for Climate Resilience and Environment and Center for Water and Land Use. Ma'am, I welcome you on behalf of Civil Islam for your lecture.
Thank you so much.
Should I play the video, ma'am?
हाँ जी शर्मा सर
जी मैडम.
I hope मेरी voice clear है. I also want to know if you want the interaction in pure English or a mix of Hindi and English.
Madam, actually most of participants are from South India, so
So English
definitely
is preferred.
difficult to
Okay.
understand. Yes, ma'am.
नहीं English will be preferred. Okay. Please
Thank
kindly play the video. And I'm sorry to bother you with this.
No, ma'am. No problem,
जी.
ma'am. दादा नेट की इशू आ रही थी. सीख लिया ना बेटा.
हाँ जी प्लीज इसे स्टॉप कर दें.
जी मैडम.
थैंक यू. इसे छोड़ दीजिए. PPT को छोड़ दें. So
जी मैम.
once again, warm good morning to all my friends here. Um, I understand. I have seen the schedule, so I am aware that a lot of our other colleagues have already interacted with you all in the last 2.5 days. Ideally, it would have been nice had my session been placed on 21st, but due to I think my non-availability, I wish to have an interaction with you all centered around some of the basic concepts and what was the need felt for having a streamlined disaster management as a subject in place. So it's not something new that in a lot of different manners, in a lot of different sectors you have been doing. I mean, as a country, as globally, we've been working on a lot of aspects from the historic times. But why was there a need that let disaster management be a more integrated, a more streamlined subject in itself? So there was a need for that. So let's focus our discussion around some of the basic concepts. आप सब students हैं, so it's nice that I would want to give you all a few food for thought, so that in future you can take up your research work. Some of your ads, some of your job profiles can be centered around working, especially because most of you are from the engineering background, so it can be centered around some of the desired works in the field of better disaster risk reduction and management. And when I say disaster risk reduction, we'll just have a detailed understanding of the very concept of DRR. So आपने एक presentation छोटा सा video देखा है. There are two parts to the video. So in the first part, can someone from the students or the participants explain what was the first part of the video? You can raise your hand. Professor Sharma can help us in that.
Yes
Any
ma'am.
student, please tell your आप अपना नाम भी बताएं. Anyone? Yes.
Participants, you can unmute yourself and
हाँ जी.
say.
Any participant who can just unmute and share what was the first part of the video? Please feel free. It's we are all here to learn, so there's nothing to be apprehensive about. Don't think at all that whatever you're going to say is going to be judged right or wrong. It's not, absolutely not like that. That's not how you learn, right? You can express your views and observation.
Deepashri madam.
Anyone? Okay, so let me just help you out. So there were two parts to the video. So the first part, Hanji.
Hello. Hello, can I
Yes.
speak?
Yes, sir. You can speak.
Natural disaster is inevitable, but man can
Hanji.
make change. Man can make changes to sustain our environment or our
Okay.
society. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. So, in the video, there were two parts. The first part showed how the cutting of trees, the degradation, the soil erosion was leading to destruction in the nearby, the area where the people were living, and how it was impacting them in terms of, the impact of those landslides or erosion on their houses. How their animals were having issues because they were not getting the adequate amount of fodder or the nutrient supplement the domestic animals need. How the crops were failing because there was persistent drought, so there was no proper rainfall around. And there was a scene of the school where the school building also collapses in an earthquake because the school building was not safe enough. And then there was a second part to the video where you were cutting the trees, after the end of the session, or maybe later, Professor Sharma sir can help us with he can just replay the video and you can just have an assessment again. So in the second part, what happened was they were cutting trees because that was a requirement. So you cannot say that you just you cannot live without cutting trees. It must be a requirement for development. But at the same time, they were planting trees also. So they were ensuring that balance is being made. And while they were cutting the trees, they had also constructed a structural wall near their village. So when there was a bit of erosion happening, that erosion was not that much, but when that erosion was still happening, the village was safe. They were having fodder for the animals because they were using drip irrigation. So they were kind of, the engineering technology was applied so that they could save whatever water they had, and that was sufficient for the crops. The crops were based on the seeds that were drought-proof seeds. So cropping was safe. The school structure was, structurally safe. So it was based on the building laws and codes assigned as per what earthquake safety measures needs to be installed. So what happened, the school structure was also safe, and the rest of the buildings fell down. So the assessment, the study which was conducted by this organization, it says that if you're going to invest $1 in such mitigation works, we'll try and understand what these terms also mean. So if you're going to invest a lot in mitigation, in structural safety, in such kind of efforts and such preparedness measures, you can save $7 in your response activities. Now that's the complete, the cycle of disaster management around which all our efforts are being centered. And that brings us to this very subject of this disaster management and why there was this need felt. So what happened was, since the prehistoric times, as a nation, as a country, we've been working, we've been taking up measures. In history, if you dig back to the history, there were measures about how droughts were impacting, how people were saving grain, people were working on saving fodder for their domestic animals. And slowly what happened was, as you neared independence, as a country, as a nation, we faced a lot of disasters, big ones, bigger disasters. Like we saw, as a country, we saw Maharashtra saw a Latur earthquake in 1993, and it saw a huge devastation in the state, in the district of Latur. And in one night, in 2003, the entire a lot portion of the Latur got destructed. To that, there were more than 10,000 deaths that happened in Latur. And then in 1999, the state of Odisha experienced a severe cyclone, super cyclone actually, not even severe. So, there are categories of cyclones. When you say it's a severe cyclone, it means something else. When you say it's a severe super cyclone, very severe cyclone, it means something else. So what does it mean? So, when initially, if the wind speeds are between 30 to 60 kilometers, you generally call it only depression. Okay, if the wind speeds are between 30 to 60 kilometers. If the wind speeds range between 61 to 88 kilometers, tab aap kehte hain, it's a cyclonic storm. So when you hear the term cyclonic storm, it would mean that there is a wind speed of between 60 to 88, 90 kilometers. It becomes a severe cyclonic storm if the wind speed ranges between 90 to 120 kilometers, and likewise it increases. And when you hear the term super cyclone, it means that the wind speeds are higher than 220 kilometer per hours. So Odisha in 1999 experienced a super cyclone. That means the wind speed were more than 250 or 260 kilometers per hour. And there was severe destruction across Odisha, the state of Odisha. A lot of districts were severely impacted, and that's like a huge thing to happen. There were a lot of deaths, more than around 14,000 people, they lost their lives. There was huge destruction to the housing sector, to other related sectors. There were huge loss of domestic animals, crop, farmlands, etc. Now there was a big issue at that time about the carcass disposal issue of domestic animals, because there was widespread destruction to domestic animals. So that led to a lot of epidemic spreading around, because once the super cyclone subsided, it turned into a health concern. So that became a big concern. Then in 2001, the state of Gujarat experienced the Bhuj earthquake. The Bhuj earthquake of 2001 is also, it is a landmark in the in the disaster management area, because it was after this particular earthquake that you subsequently started taking measures to take care of these disasters. So after the Gujarat earthquake in 2004, a lot of South Indian states, especially the state of Tamil Nadu, experienced tsunami. And that was something new for all of us. Even the very term tsunami was new for a lot of us, for a lot of you also. And eventually, as a nation, as a country, we realized that a lot of our developmental funds were being diverted to manage these disasters. So 93 super Latur earthquake, then 99 super cyclone of Orissa, and likewise. So a lot of your developmental funds were being diverted to just manage to give relief to people who were impacted by these disasters. So what happened was there was a thought, there was the thought, and there was a committee also established later on that there is a need that we identify which are the different hazards that impact our nation, and we need to take adequate measures to manage these hazards so that they do not turn into disasters. And with this thought line, the Disaster Management Act came into picture in 2005. Immediately 1 year after the tsunami of 2004. So on 26th of December 2005, you had the Disaster Management Act of the country in place. The idea was, it was based on the thought line that prevention is better than cure. So it was decided that you will have measures. There was a paradigm shift in the thought of the people who were involved. And before this Disaster Management Act, the streamlining of that act came into picture. In 1999, there was a high-powered committee also established to identify which are the different hazards that impact India, that India needs to safeguard itself from, so that there are less, there's a decrease in disasters. So 33 different natural hazards were identified. It included a couple of them were human-induced also. So 33 different natural hazards were identified based on their origins. So like the category 1 is the water and climate-related hazards. So you would say, heavy rainfall is a weather pattern. So it's caused due to changes in the weather phenomena, heat waves, cold waves, cyclonic storms. So likewise, so there are many more, thunderstorms, lightning. So these are some of the categories that fall under the water and weather related hazards. Then the second category is geological hazards. So hazards which impact the geology of the landmass. So that's like mostly the landslides and earthquakes. Even at times mine fires happen because of some landslides are induced inside and they lead to some fire incidences. So naturally, if that happens, even incidences of mine flooding also happen. So some natural waves that happens, dam failures because some earthquake might happen around that dam site, so that might lead to rupturing and breaching of that dam. The third category is chemical, industrial, and nuclear hazards, which can lead to any sort of chemical, industrial, and nuclear disasters. So maybe some oil spillage has occurred, maybe some chemical plant, some leakages, and the classic example here we all quote is the Bhopal tragedy. So we always remember that it happened in December 1984, but 30 years later, it's 30 plus years later, it's still very vivid in our minds. Why? Because it still has deep environmental impacts. It still has deep social impact.
Hello, excuse me, ma'am. Slides are not visible.
Hello? Yes.
Slides are not
I
visible.
have not shown the slide. The slides are not being shown actually.
Okay, thank
You can use this PPT later on. Okay. Hello.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am.
Actually, I'm not able to control the slide movement also, so that's why I'm just speaking. All right.
I can control from here if you want, ma'am.
Yeah, I'll just start that once we reach the term hazard. Okay.
No problem.
G. So what happened was also that is a third category. So you still have issues with the Bhopal tragedy event, and it was actually after Bhopal tragedy that there was the Environmental Protection Act of 1987 came into existence. There were changes made with respect to transport and manufacturing of hazardous chemicals and likewise. So that's the third category. Category fourth is category of accidents. So building collapses, even they've placed bomb blast as a category there. Accidents which are caused due to festivals or air accidents, road accidents, rail accidents. So likewise, so these are category 4 accidents, and the category 5th is the one that is of importance in the current scenario, which is the pandemic time. So it is biological hazards. So where epidemics and pandemics. So can anyone tell me what is the difference between an epidemic and a pandemic? Any participant?
The slides are not moving.
Any participant?
So slides are not moving. It is
Yeah.
Yeah,
Ma'am,
we'll
slide we are seeing.
You can put the first slide.
Oh yes, this is the first slide.
Yeah. So can anyone tell me what is the difference between an epidemic and a pandemic?
Don't know, madam.
So when you have a hello? Yes.
yes, ma'am.
So what I was saying was, so when you have something in a localized area, any disease that impacts, one community, one district, one state, when it is a bit more localized, you call it an epidemic. But when it spreads globally, it spreads across a lot of states and across a lot of nations, you call it a pandemic. So your coronavirus is termed as a pandemic because it is spread world over. All right. So these hazards were identified, and if I may just explain what you mean by the hazard is, Sharma sir, please slide आगे बढ़ा दें. So
Yes.
any event, any phenomena that can lead to, it has the potential to cause harm. If you simply want to explain that term, it is any phenomena that has, that can pose threat to people, to structures, to economy. So anything that has a potential to cause harm, even if it means a large stone, if you hit a stone on someone's head and if that causes an injury, then that stone becomes a hazard for you. Is it clear? It becomes a hazard. It has a potential to cause harm. So it can be natural hazards and they can be human-induced or man-made hazards. Examples are varied. So earthquake in itself is actually a natural hazard. Severe intense rainfalls are actually natural hazards. Tsunami is a phenomenon that generates mostly under the sea when there is a big earthquake and it leads to a huge surge of water movement. So that combination is called a tsunami. So these are examples of few examples of hazards. And then there are human-induced hazards. So it can be, you have the Naxal issues, you have terrorism issues, you have issues of any kind of warfare. So all these are few examples which when they lead to, sir, next slide kar denge. So when these hazards, have the potential to turn into disasters. So what happens is sometimes they can be sudden disasters, sometimes they can be, slow disasters. So any event whose origin is a natural hazard or whose origin is a human hazard, and it can be slow or it can be sudden, and that impacts a community beyond its own coping capacity. So what happens is if you have a live bomb in your hand, it is a hazard, correct? Because it has the potential to cause harm, but it has not caused any harm. But when that bomb gets dropped in any, any area where there's a huge population, where a lot of lives are lost, where there is a huge destruction, assets, property gets destructed. So then that becomes a bomb blast, becomes a disaster. So that is a difference between a hazard and a disaster. And it becomes important, especially when we are doing a lot of our research, when we are doing a lot of our work, that you have to segregate different hazards. And like I had mentioned, the High Powered Committee has identified for India at least 33 different kinds of natural hazards, which can cause and turn into different disasters for our country. So they can lead to a lot of disasters for our country. Now, what happens that your, disaster, your hazard becomes a disaster? What happens? What can be the different impacts that happen because of disasters? Hello?
Hello.
Yes.
Now, what's the difference between hazardous and disaster?
Difference between?
Hazardous and disaster.
So like I was saying, a hazard is any item, any phenomena. It can be natural or it can be a human-induced phenomena. Okay? Say for example, you have a live bomb. You're holding a live bomb in your hand. It is a hazard. It has now not caused any destruction. Only when it causes destruction, it turns into a disaster. Okay? Say for example, there is rainfall. If there is severe rainfall, you would say that this severe rainfall is a hazard. There are chances that this severe rainfall will block a lot of your landmass, will cause a lot of destruction to your standing crops, can lead to flooding, and some people can drown in that flooding water and lose their lives. So then that severe rainfall turns into a flood situation, and then that flood becomes a disaster. Clear?
Okay.
So if there is an earthquake in a very plain area where there is no building, there is no construction, and there is an earthquake, what will happen? There will be only a very slow shaking, but usse kuch nuksan nahi hoga. There will be no loss. But what if that earthquake occurs in a place where there are huge buildings, there are huge flyovers, there are a lot of population living, and a lot of destruction is caused by that earthquake? Then that earthquake turns into an earthquake disaster. But otherwise, it is only a hazard. It has a potential to cause harm. And what kind of harms? You lose life, you lose property, there is loss of property and infrastructure, then there is damage to livelihood. After tsunami, what happened to all the fishermen who were nearing the coast, a lot of those coastlines? Those people, they lost their boats, they lost their fishing nets, they could not go into the sea for fishing. There was a lot of psychological fear in their minds of the sea. Imagine the fishermen having the fear of the sea. That is the psychological impact. They had that fear because they had experienced something so grave. There was a tsunami, there was a wave. And so there is no livelihood. You cannot go for fishing. You will not earn anything. You cannot sell that fish in the local market. You cannot sell that fish in the state market. So there will not be any revenue generation. You cannot sell that fish in the international market. So for the country also, it becomes an economic loss. If Sharmaji, if you can place other points in this slide, so the participants can see. So you will have loss to property and infrastructure. आपका livelihood impact हो जाता है. Uttarakhand floods of 2013 is a very classic example of how all the people who used to come from the neighboring villages, and they used to work in near the Kedarnath temple, and they lost all their shops and all their livelihood sources. They were a lot of them who had taken loans from the banks. There were a lot of men who lost their lives, and now they are survived by only their wives. They have only small children. They have elders in the house. So there are that vulnerability groups are left behind. Now, how are these women, how are these old parents going to survive without any livelihood support system? So these are the impacts that you would see from these disasters. And like I said, if that impact from a local level, from a local market, from an individual fisherman, if that impact reaches to your state GDP, your country's GDP, then it leads to a long-term economic loss. Likewise, you will also notice if such hazards convert into disasters. For example, classic examples are Uttarakhand experiences forest fires every year. California jungles experience severe forest fires every year. You can read about them. You can Google about them. The Amazon forest fires have been one of the previous last year's classic examples of how a huge environmental damage is caused to the plant and animal species, the flora and fauna, the flora plant species and the fauna animal species. So there's a huge destruction caused to your, biodiversity, your ecosystems. In India, you have very raw, biodiverse zones, Andaman and Nicobar Islands, the Lakshadweep Islands. There are more such island places, union territories. So they have huge endemic, very, significant species of plants and animals in that ecosystem. And if I may also add, imagine you all, if you are asked to quantify these losses. If I ask you what will be the value of losing one endemic, bird species, can you give it a valuation? Can you give it a monetary valuation? Can you say that this loss of this plant species or this animal species is equivalent to this much rupees or this much crore? See, it is so, imagine how much of a stress that causes on not just your environment, but also on the respective ministries who work for such preservation and conservation conservation or sustainability of such biodiversity. So that's like a huge impact you have. And tsunami was one of the classic examples of impacts that were seen in Andaman and Nicobars. And I'd also mentioned, I'd given the example of psychological, the mental impact that you have. You know, you have the fear of that disaster. You have the, because you have experienced, you must have experienced loss of your family members, your dear ones. So there is a psychological fear in your minds, which causes a lot of mental stress. People tend to commit suicides. People are worried. They have fear that they have lost their livelihoods. So these are severe, grave impacts that you will have, and that makes it important that you know, these may be minimized. Next slide, please. So, this were some of the examples, like I was mentioning, the high-powered committee. So, centered around these examples are your disasters. I hope this slide will be more clear. So, there can be floods. It is a water and climate-related disaster, but it will be caused by severe, heavy rainfalls, hailstorms. Like you see those ice cubes, ice balls that fall, that हम उसको ओले बोलते हैं, ओले की वर्षा होना. So hailstorms also cause a lot of impacts on your crops. Your crop destruction increases. Cloudburst. So cloudburst is like more than 100 mm of rainfall in a very, very localized place. Leh Ladakh experienced a severe cloudburst in the year 2010, and a lot of your tourism was impacted. So centered around this slide are a lot of permutation combination of disasters that can happen and that can impact India as a country. So, you know, our research, our planning should be focused around some of these examples. So this is that slide. Next slide, please. This is just to show that mostly or maximum times it is the hydrometeorological disasters that impact more. So there, the chances of heat waves, cold waves, hailstorms, avalanches, snowfalls, incessant rainfalls, droughts, tsunamis, they are all part of the hydrometeorological category. So that impacts, more, or it causes more number of disasters. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I wanted, to take some time for this slide. So what happens if I ask you all, why a hazard does not remain as a hazard? Why an earthquake turns into a disaster, or why a hazard turns into a disaster? Why we cannot, can we not prevent the hazard? Can we not make sure that the hazard does not convert into a disaster? It is always 100 times not possible. So what happens is, it brings us to the three terms that I've placed here. So one is vulnerability. In Hindi we call it samvedanshilta. So in the simplest manner, if I have to explain you, anything that can get damaged is vulnerable. Okay, it can be human beings, it can be our property, it can be buildings, houses, roads, flyovers, your metros, your trains, your planes, your domestic animals, your flora, fauna, anything. So any movable, immovable, human, non-human, entity that can get impacted or damaged because of a hazard is termed as a vulnerable element. Now, what happens is that vulnerability can be less or more. How it can be less or more? The more you are exposed or you're closer to a hazard, you are more vulnerable. For example, look at the house in the picture. It is on a hill slope. So if there is erosion, if there is a landslide, this house is more vulnerable as compared to a house that must have been constructed on a plain land. So with respect to that hazard, that landslide hazard, this particular house is more at risk. It is vulnerable to getting damaged by that landslide, and it is more at risk. There is probability that this house will get impacted more, damaged more. There will be more loss to this house as compared to any other houses. I'll quote an example. There is a place called Malin in Maharashtra. So, there's a hilltop, and there were 52 houses living below that hilltop. So what this villagers used to do was, they used to cut that hill, they used to make that hill plain in portions, and they used to do cropping. So what happened subsequently over the years, that hill lost its strength, because in parts the entire hilltop was had become vulnerable. So in August 2014, when there was a severe rainfall during the monsoon season, all the the mud and that erosion, the soil eroded, and all these 52 houses which were below that hilltop, they got washed away. So all these people were vulnerable because they were close to this hill which was already vulnerable to landslides. So that is how you define vulnerabilities. It can be, you can categorize the vulnerabilities as physical vulnerabilities, like your closeness, where you are placed, in terms of maybe say houses, or maybe even if you are standing. Now there are other examples to debate also. I'll quote one example from that also. For example, you're very close to a riverside. So what if the river gets flooded? You will be more vulnerable and at risk as compared to someone who's far away from that river. So that makes you physically more vulnerable. And if you can remember, there were huge videos when Uttarakhand 2000 flooding happened, that there were houses and houses that were going down because they were very close to the riverside. So they were so prone, they were so vulnerable that from that risk of that, what was that lake burst that happened, and then subsequent heavy rainfall that occurred, all these houses went down. All right, so that is vulnerability. Now, how is vulnerability linked to capacity? You have to increase the capacity, your strength, your manpower, in terms of your manpower and equipment, so that you can reduce the vulnerabilities. So these two are inversely proportional terms. And in the field of disaster management, or now DRR, I'll also explain to you very properly what DRR means. In the field of disaster risk reduction or disaster management, the aim is, or all our efforts are to increase capacities of people, of property, to strengthen buildings, so that if there is an earthquake, that building will withstand that earthquake. So that means you have increased the capacity and you reduce the vulnerability. So like I was saying, vulnerabilities are of different kinds. So it can be economic vulnerability also. Some people do not have good houses. Some people do not have good places to stay. They are not that much aware. So there is lack of awareness. So economic vulnerability, environmental vulnerability, I've already quoted, like biodiversity, how biodiversity gets impacted, and social vulnerability, that brings the humans into the vulnerable category. So your pregnant ladies, lactating, feeding mothers, they need extra support and help, so they are more vulnerable. Small children, they cannot take care by themselves, so they are more vulnerable. Your elders in the houses are more vulnerable. In the current pandemic situation, if you look, there are people in the families who are already suffering from diseases. So the comorbid patients. So if you are already having, suffering from some asthmatic, from some sugar issues, the diabetic issues, some other disease, some other heart ailments that you have, then there is chances that you will become more vulnerable to catching the coronavirus. So this group becomes more vulnerable as compared to other healthy adults. Of course, from this pandemic situation, there have been examples where a lot of healthy people have also lost their lives. So the reasons could vary. Maybe suddenly, their bodies did not have that much immunity, or other reasons attached to it, medical reasons. But you have these vulnerable groups. So the idea is increase your capacities, manpower ko skill, in terms of your manpower, providing skill to manpower, empowering communities in terms of their skill building, or in terms of even having good equipment, good support system, so that when a hazard turns into a disaster, you can take care better. And that is related to also the risk. So risk is only a probability, a chance. So if you take adequate measures, your hazard may not turn into a big disaster. So the risk is that there is less chance that the hazard will turn into a disaster, but there is a risk associated. And this is something that we use very commonly. Okay. Next slide, please. Now here we can clearly understand the terms, and we will also understand what DRR means, so that tomorrow, and not just tomorrow, from tomorrow onwards, anytime you hear the term DRR, you want to use the term DRR, you want to work in the field of DRR, you would know what it means. So it's actually a cyclic process here. So what happens is, in a pre-disaster times, if you look at the left side part of it, the pre-disaster times, so there is no disaster now, you are dealing with an approaching hazard. So what are you dealing with? You have, the IMD has issued a warning. The IMD says that there is going to be a huge cyclonic there's a cyclone formation is taking place, and it will impact the coast of Odisha and Telangana or Andhra Pradesh in the coming 48 hours or 72 hours. So what do we have to deal with? Only a hazard, and the hazard only has the potential to cause harm. It's not necessary that it will lead to a lot of destruction. So your first step, your first idea would be, can we try and prevent this from happening? Can you avoid hazards? So that is prevention. Is it possible? Can you avoid few hazards? So if I may ask you all, can you avoid hazards? Anyone? Yes or no?
No,
No, madam, no.
no. Actually, we cannot prevent hazard. We can only reduce the risk of it.
Its impact. Okay, so you may not be able to prevent it always, but you can try. If you cannot prevent it always, of course you can minimize the risk by not constructing houses very close to the river sides or on the hill slopes, etc. But that's practically always not possible because you need development parallelly. So what you can do is you can only try and mitigate. That is, the impact of that approaching hazard can be minimized. Here is the role mostly of engineers and architects and people who are involved in land use planning and likewise efforts. And you must have had a lot of interactions with other esteemed speakers that how structural measures, mitigation measures are a place where most of you will have a role to play. So in terms of what kind of constructions, what kind of engineering solutions, sea walls, how energy can be distributed, and even if you go below in the preparedness, where I've said that even if you take mitigation efforts, you need to be in a state of readiness because that cyclone is approaching, and definitely in the coming 42 hours or 48 hours or 70 hours, it will have a landfall. So you have to be in a state of readiness, and for that you need good early warnings. So that also calls in for technological advancements. So you need to have the right modelings done. You need to have the right equipments in place, the right radars and likewise your equipments for good early warning systems. And if you notice, as a country, if I may speak, over the years, our technological advancement in terms of early warnings are turning out to be very accurate. And one classic example is the cyclone Fani, and one or two previous cyclones also, where the warnings given by IMD were more accurate than as compared to the world meteorological warnings. So in terms of what is the speed with which the cyclone is traveling and how exactly the places where it is going to make a landfall. So what will happen is, if you have good technology in place, if you have the right early warning systems in place, the trust building gets maintained. Because if your warnings fail, then the people to whom you have asked for doing a lot of evacuation, if you look at the parallel step, that evacuation, you need to move people to safety before a disaster happens, so that people don't lose their lives. So if you move people to safety, and if your warnings are not accurate, then what happens? That you lose the trust building. People lose that trust. I'm sure you all can relate. In the past also it used to happen. If you used to get the warnings, there is going to be severe rainfall, but there used to be no rainfall. Because we had issues with the technological terms. It was not that it was a deliberate thing to do. So of late, you also have the concepts of forecast. Like they can give you an information. I'm sure, I'm not too sure if there have been speakers on early warning systems, but the concept of forecast where nowcast, so if the current 3-4 hours, what is going to be the situation, that accurate assessments are being put in place. So that can help people, not just to be in a state of readiness, but to be in a state of preparedness, but also it will help these people to get timely, accurate warnings as to how they have to proceed further. Please note, evacuation looks like a very a simple term, but evacuation is a very, very difficult administrative and managerial task. The cyclone Fani saw the evacuation of more than 12 lakh people to safe zones. Moving 12 lakh people in a pre-cyclone times or in a pre-disaster cyclone times it was a challenging task and that makes even more important that you keep having good, correct, accurate early warnings in place. So these are some of the steps which when you have them in place, you can say that the disaster or the conversion of your hazard would not turn into a mega disaster. You are preparing yourself, you are putting mitigation measures in place. Like I quoted the example of Orissa super cyclone 99. So in 99, you had the death of more than 10,000 people. But the Orissa Phylum cyclone of 2013 was again super cyclone with 240 plus wind speed. But the destruction was less than, many people, many places statistics are quoted below 50. And there are statistics which say it was even less than 10. Whereas if you all will compare from 1999 in 2013, the population of Orissa must have grown multifold. The population of these coastal places would have grown multifold. So the destruction actually should have been multifold times. Correct? But what we did, we installed mitigation measures. Between 99 to 2013, Orissa initially in 99 had less than even 50 or 60 cyclone shelters. But by 2013, Odisha had more than 800 cyclone shelters. So safe shelters, which are actually based on your correct engineering and architectural plannings. You identify safe sites to construct these shelters. You make them multi-purpose so that their maintenance is taken care of. Otherwise, for maybe 4 years, you do not need that shelter site, and then one fine day when you actually need it, the shelter does not exist, or it is in a dilapidated state, so it falls down itself. So it will turn into a disaster itself. So that transformation is a structural mitigation. Why you have done that? So that you can, reduce the impact of that approaching hazard. So if you are taking good preventive measures, you are installing good mitigations, you are in a good state. The approaching hazard, there are chances that the approaching hazard will not turn into a mega disaster. Eventually, if there are a lot of vulnerabilities, if you have not increased your capacities, there are still a lot of vulnerabilities. And in terms of social vulnerabilities, in terms of physical vulnerabilities, then these vulnerabilities are more at risk to that approaching cyclone with the example that I quoted, and it will turn into a disaster. So what will happen in a post-disaster time? You will be dealing with a disaster situation. So here is a time when you will see a lot of destruction. You will see a lot of loss of lives. Like we saw the impacts, property destruction, livelihoods will get impacted, and likewise psychological impacts, etc. So what you have to do, you have to immediately start the response. Now this is not directly where you and I will play a role. This is more to do in terms of administration and governance. And they also say that the better response that you do in the initial hours, if you can save the maximum lives, it means that you have kind of managed that disaster situation well. Where will your role come? You need to have temporary restorations done. You need to restore power as quickly as possible, because on the power will be dependent upon your total communication. So if your communication and all this gets failed, then that will hamper your entire coordination of that response, that post-disaster management aspects. So here are the places, some of the classic examples of, again, these temporary restoration measures were, one of the classical example is Uttarakhand event of 2013 and Jammu Kashmir floods of 2014. So in Uttarakhand, it's a hilly terrain and you do not have helipads everywhere. So most of the private airlines could not, fly over these places and make their flights land, because they are technically, trained in a way that they need helipads. So your entire relief was dependent upon your army and air force. Now what happened was, because it's a hills and the hills were cut vertically, the population was, the affected people were staggered in different parts. So your entire relief, that rescue was dependent on airlifting. And this is considered as one of the mega airlifted operations, disaster management operations in the history of Indian disasters, if you may say so. So more than 1,20,000 people were airlifted. Imagine how daunting that task is. So that requires some sort of temporary helipads to be made, or some sort of land to be evacuated or made plain. You need temporary bridges to be constructed. So such a temporary restoration becomes very important. They become the key behind such measures. Then comes your search and rescue efforts. So initially, it's a skill task. So you have specialized forces that deal with search and rescue. Nonetheless, a lot of engineers, a lot of doctors, paramedics, psychologists also play a role in the initial few things, because they can provide that necessary support in terms of the kind of construction. And if I may say so, this is again another place where the roles are very important. Then you move to relief, more administrative in nature. There are standard guidelines established for what is the minimum relief standard in terms of health, hygiene, sanitation, and likewise. And then you come to a long-term measure, which is the recovery. And this is, divided into two parts: rehabilitation and reconstruction. So, reconstruction, if you can read the slide I've written, Build Back Better. I'm sure a lot of other speakers must have also thrown light upon on this. But this is where you and I can actually make a lot of difference now. If you're looking for a time when you feel that where can I contribute, and it is actually such places in the reconstruction phase, please link it to your mitigation activity. You are talking about structural safety measures. So now when you are designing strategies, when as a state, when as a country, you are working on building houses, building the bridges, building the roads back, you're trying to bring back that normalcy, you're going to ensure that a lot of better engineering, a lot of better land proofing, land planning measures are installed. So that needs to go in your planning, and that's why this is a long term measure. It is not something that can happen in 6 to 8 months. Of post tsunami, the state of Tamil Nadu, the reconstruction measures went on for like 8 to 10 years. It took so many years. It took time to get those fundings. It took time to decide where the new houses will be constructed, what kind of new constructor is advised, what kind of earthquake-proof construction and flood-proof constructions need to be put in place. So that is the idea of when you say build back better. जब हम बोलते हैं ना, build back better is now your construction has to be safe. So this time, if you get impacted by an earthquake, your engineering measures are such, your retrofitting, your reconstruction measures are such that they will withstand smaller or a larger earthquakes. Not going into the science behind earthquakes, but one difficulty with earthquakes is that you still as research, you still it's a challenge. It's still a challenge to get good early warnings for earthquakes. Timely warnings. There are countries working on it. There are various examples where people and organizations are trying to get those warnings so that people can be moved to safety. People can be in the now. What I'm talking is from the preparedness perspective. So people can be given advance warnings. So early warnings, so people can be given. So if that is a hindrance, and Latur has been a classic example where Latur did not at that time fall even under the severe seismic zones. So it was not a place where you could expect earthquake of even 5+. It was below that range, and it experienced a severe earthquake. So that makes it important that you have better reconstruction and reconstruction measures in place. So that is with respect to reconstruction. And rehabilitation is more to do with providing livelihood opportunities. What kind of livelihood opportunities will you draw? Like I had quoted examples, if you are survived by your spouse who is not trained enough, who does not have a formal education. So what kind of skill building can you give to that person when that other bread earning member is lost from that family? So that requires a bit of planning. That it is not something that you will just design that provide. You have to think, if a farmer is losing a lot of his land to the saltness of due to salinity because of tsunami water or sea water intrusion, and for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, if that farmer is unable to do cultivation, would you ask him to just go and do some mason work? No, he's not trained for that. So you need to give him some alternative that is related. And with respect to masons, that reminds me that in terms of the Build Back initiative, as a country, the government of India had also designed a project which was centered around training your masons. Because when as an individual, as a layman, when I go for my own house, individual house construction, my contact point is actually the mason. So if the mason is sensitized, if the mason tells me that, look, madam, this area is falls under seismic zone 4, and if you invest 5% or 3% or 2% extra on your mitigation, And if I do some extra, it provides some extra, strength to your house construction, you will be safe for the next 50 years. So for that was the idea behind this mason training. And this can be one good initiative. You can take up a lot of research on how this has worked across the country, how different the uniqueness of India is that, across from north, south, west, south and west, east and west, you will see you have very traditional, different kind of housing structures. Madhya Pradesh is totally different. Down south is different. I remember post tsunami, there was a Japanese technology that was tried for the new constructions, and they came up with a technology where a semi-structured house on wheels was introduced. That people can stay in these houses, and if there is an emergency, if there is a storm surge, if there is a cyclone, or if there is a approaching tsunami, these houses have wheels so they can be moved. But not even a single house was occupied by these fishermen. Why? Because that's not how they are used to living. They have their own certain individual way of living standards, living lifestyles. So, when you go in for such constructions, you have to keep that aspect in mind, that a local population, a local community has his or her way of living. So keeping those things in mind, integrating these efforts, only you can take up reconstruction. So if now why you and I are, even why Professor Sharma has taken all the pain to organize this program for you all, because it has been made mandatory as part of the Sendai framework and previously the Hyogo framework. I'm not too sure if somebody, other speakers have, spoken about the Hyogo framework and Sendai framework. But Hyogo framework was a plan of action that was introduced between 2005 to 2015 for 10 years, where India was also a signatory, and we had to take efforts for better disaster management. Now, if you look at this slide, and if I ask any one of you, if I say disaster management, which are the steps you would focus on from this slide? Anyone? If I say we need to do better disaster management, so which steps from this slide you will focus on? Anyone? So your emphasis will be more on response. No, your emphasis. See, I'm talking about management. So when I say disaster management, that means a disaster has happened. So if it has happened, you will focus on response, you will focus on temporary restoration, on search and rescue, on relief, and then you will go on long-term reconstruction, rehabilitation. So when it was the Hyogo framework from 2005 to 15, your efforts were mostly on better management. The act also was made with that intent. But what happened was, after 2015 in Sendai, which is a place in Japan, in March 2015, all these countries again met and they decided that, look, let us work on the prevention aspect. Why should we go on curing the disease and putting in a lot of investment, a lot of money is also getting so diverted. So let's try and minimize or reduce the risks of only disasters. So the emphasis was on managing hazards, so that the hazard does not get converted into your disaster situation. So when we say disaster risk reduction, DRR, your efforts would be mostly centered around prevention, mitigation, and preparedness. That does not mean you will not go for response and other activities. That is, the idea is that the disaster is not of that magnitude. Smaller, the impact is less, there is less loss of life, so there is response to be done, there is less need for search and rescue. Your buildings are constructed in a way that when that hazard strikes, when the earthquake occurs, that building withstands that earthquake. So there is less of search and rescue, there is less of building collapse. So your measures are centered around DRR, and that is the pre-disaster phase. So from now onwards, whenever you use the term DRR, your emphasis, you would quickly think DRR means your measures should be focused around preventing the hazard, mitigating the hazard, and being in a state of readiness. Working on early warnings, working on evacuations, and based on centered around these DRR measures is the 4 targets and 7 targets and 4 priorities. Let us do risk mapping. So can you not do that? Is it not possible to go in for again, do a mapping of vulnerable zones zones, earthquake vulnerable zones, landslide vulnerable zones. So investing more on risk assessments, on risk mapping, on identifying, we as HPC, we have identified different hazards. If you remember, there was a previous slide I had shown. And these are the hazards. If you can prevent them or work on them and mitigate them or work on them and be more better prepared, you will have chances of the need for less response and less management. So your post-disaster measures automatically, they reduce down. Okay, so your measures have to be centered around the DRR initiative. Can I have the next slide, please? Can I have the next slide, please?
Yes, ma'am. I have changed from my end.
Fine. So no, it is not visible actually. So the point is, with these actually things in mind, the Sendai framework and the concept of DRR was introduced. But with the same intent, the Disaster Management Act was also placed. Like I was mentioning, India actually did not have any policy on disaster management in the past. The first policy that India made with respect to disaster management was in the year, in the month of October 2009. What was the attitude? The attitude was more that it is caused by nature. It is anger of God, and it is the will of the God. That was the attitude. And still today, you have religious faith imbibed, ingrained and imbibed around the idea of natural hazards. You say that such heavy rainfall is caused because it is the nature's fury, and it is God's willing that this is happening. So that is a lot of people, even around some of the floods and earthquakes that we work on. There are examples where there are religious faith installed. So we are not ignoring them. We are saying let's work in unison. So there's science and there is also this religious faith, this philosophy behind it. So with that attitude, we were moving. Mostly the government interventions were only around relief and rehabilitation. So when I say relief, it means you give some ex gratia, give people money. So what was happening? There was a disaster. You start diverting all the development funds for relief work. And then now you have rehabilitation to do, you have reconstruction to do. You have to make new houses, you have to provide new livelihood opportunities. So you're going to provide a lot of money for that. So your funds were getting diverted to doing all of this. Then initially, as India, because we used to have famines in India, India has a history of famines. So because we had a history of famines, that is called Akal in Hindi, it was considered that only drought and famines were considered as disasters for India in the pre-independence era. So disaster management as a subject was only looked after by the Ministry of Agriculture. This is the reason that in the past, Ministry of Agriculture used to, because floods, cyclones, earthquakes, landslides, they were not considered as disasters previously. So you only thought that it is droughts and famines. And what is the difference between droughts and famines? So drought is when there is less rainfall due to lack of rainfall or water. Your crops are lost. You do not get the desired amount of crops. It is restricted to the cropping land. And when you do not have that sufficient amount of crops in the markets, when that seasons of droughts keep happening, and when the impact is visible in the society, when there is malnourishment, when people start migrating, when people start moving to different places, they leave their houses, that migration is because of that drought seasons and related impacts. There is death that occurs, then it is called famines. So obviously now we have managed, as a country, we have managed famines. We have, grain stocks, everything, all those are there in place. So we manage the drought situations. So the Ministry of Agriculture used to look after the area of disaster management, and the response was mostly on armed forces. Next slide, please. So this is how we were moving. This is how we were seeing. And like I had mentioned, we saw a lot of, very major ones. So there are a lot of other minor things that were happening. A lot of smaller earthquakes. There was Chamoli earthquake. India is a witness in the history. If you look at the history also, there have been major earthquakes and minor earthquakes and landslides and likewise events. Next slide, please. But these were some of the major events that occurred. And as a country, we realized that we do not have good scientific hazard risk vulnerability mapping. Now, when I say Hazard, risk, vulnerability mapping. I'm sure you all know each term separately. So a hazard is something that has a potential to cause harm. Vulnerabilities are those things, those are exposed to those hazards that can get damaged and increases the risk. So you are under a risk that you will get impacted. So risk is generally defined as high risk, medium risk, moderate. So that's like you assign a cumulative score. So based on how you do the seismic zone assessments. So you say that a seismic zone 5, if I may ask anyone, when I say seismic zone 5, what does that mean? Seismic zone 5, anyone? What would that mean?
Participants, please unmute yourself and give the answer.
If I say seismic zone 5, what does that mean? So it means these are places where earthquakes of magnitude more than 7.9, 8 plus earthquakes can occur. So that's how you have categorized. So that means the risk is very high for such places. Correct? So high, medium, low, how you define the risk. Now, we also did not have adequate early warning systems. We did not have good safe building practices. Constructions were rampant. There was no things considered that if you're going in for a construction on a hill slope, you need to have some sort of landslide risk mitigation measures in place. But all that were not taken care of. In terms of awareness generation and preparedness also we were lacking. There was a huge environmental degradation happening around. All the developmental projects, they were, that is how it was seen. Your hydropower projects, your road constructions in the hills projects, your other projects centered around developments, they were adding on to new disasters because that impact assessment studies were not done about. Now it has been made mandatory by the Ministry of Environment and Forest. So any new development project, above a certain financial value, needs to get a risk assessment done, needs to get a disaster risk assessment done. So only after that clearance it gets, the project is taken up. So this is it. These were some of the flaws that were identified, and even after that, whatever relief we used to give, it was quite kind of inadequate. Next slide, please. Based on that, a high power committee, like I said, was established. It was decided that let's have a shift from relief centric approach to a more holistic approach. And then it had also mentioned in the 11th 5-year plan that you need to invest in risk management and mapping. Next slide, please. Now, based on all these, findings, roadmap was designed, and that Disaster Management Act came into picture in 2005. Next slide, please. Yeah. So here, and based on this act, the prime responsibility for managing any disaster. Now, when I say managing a disaster, it means the post-disaster activities. That means response, temporary restoration, relief work, search and rescue work, and long-term reconstruction and rehabilitation. That is the response part. So the prime responsibility, as per the act, lies on a particular state. And this is the reason you can see some states are doing really well in terms of disaster management, and there are states which are lagging behind because it is the state, initiative. How much priority that state is giving for taking up awareness activities, putting in funds for managing these disasters. So that is how. So the prime responsibility lies with the state and that district. And if you look at this particular slide, so at the national level, now the Planning Commission is actually the Niti Aayog, but you have the Ministry of Home Affairs, that is the nodal ministry for dealing with all natural hazards. So any disaster that is caused by a natural hazard is looked after by Ministry of Home Affairs. There are other ministries and departments. For example, there is a rail accident, then that is looked after by Ministry of Railways. If there is an accident,
Ravi.
it is looked after by Ministry of Civil Aviation. Likewise, armed forces are also called in, but they are a separate entity. At the national level, you have the National Disaster Management Authority, which is headed by the Prime Minister, sir. He's the chairperson. And then you have 9 members. Then you have the National Institute of Disaster Management. You have National Disaster Response Forces. In the country, we have 12 active national disaster response forces, and there are 4 more NDRFs that are in pipeline. Then you have National Disaster Resource Centers. You have the Cabinet Secretariat. You have the Cabinet committees. Why do you need these committees? There is a National Executive Committee, NEC, because when you have to, disperse fundings, when the state asks center for some fundings when a disaster occurs in that state, it is the NEC that takes a call as to what is the amount that will be given to that state for funding options. Like, correct? In the same manner as the national setup, you have the state setup. So each state also has a state disaster management authority headed by the chief minister, and each district has a district disaster management authority, which is DDMA, which is headed by the disaster collector. Okay, so that is the DM. All right. As per the disaster management policy of 2009, state disaster response forces have also been created. Like you have at the center the National Disaster Response Force. In the states, you have the formation of the State Disaster Response Force. There is also the need to make female inclusive, state disaster forces, because at the national level, you do not have a lot of female in these battalions, because there are needs attached as per during the relief camps and all. So you have the state disaster response forces. Most of the states have turned active, and they have their response forces now being formed. Why the state response forces is required? Because the national response forces are placed strategically. So, if they're placed in Delhi and Uttarakhand needs them, it takes a lot of time for them to reach. So if Uttarakhand itself has its own state disaster force, then it will be easier for them to reach very timely. And then you have line departments, civil defense, home guards, police, fire services, and the same pattern is at the district level also. So this is how in the country you have the establishment of the system in place. And then you have, as per the act, it is mandatory that as a country we have the national disaster management plan in place. Can anyone tell me whether we have the national disaster management plan for India? Do we have that? Anyone? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, we have.
Okay, so we had that, the first one in 2016, and then it has been again revised by the National Disaster Management Authority in the year 2019. So the next plan has also come in 2019. All right, now that makes it mandatory that your states have their state disaster management plans in place. It even makes it mandatory that all line departments, all central ministries, and their subordinate officers or parallel officers have their evacuation plans or disaster management plans in place. Why? The idea is that business continuity needs to be maintained, so that even during emergencies, these plans can be functional. These plans can help in maintaining or in running the businesses. All right. So if a state develops a state disaster management plan, which is the prime responsibility of the SDMAs, that needs to be vetted by the National Disaster Management Authority, and it gives a clearance. Likewise, each district needs to have a district plan in place, and in our country, in the present context, I think we have about some 118, 20, or maybe a more number of districts, and all districts in the country have their plans in place. In fact, there are few districts, if I may add, who are going in for regular updation of their plans, and they're adding the requirements based on their districts in terms of climate change variations, in terms of new green zones to be constructed, or in terms of how heat wave is impacting, how off late the unpredictability in the rainfalls is impacting. So what kind of developmental activities do they need to revise or revamp? So based on all those things, a lot of districts are working on their district disaster management plans, which needs to be again vetted from the state authorities, and they need to put them in place. Now that we are working towards the Sendai framework, goals and targets, and that also means, I'm sure you all are aware that we have 17 sustainable development goals also parallelly, which are also to be achieved by the year 2030. So the deadline is the same. What is required is a lot of efforts where you have sustainable goals in terms of, I cannot recollect the goal number, but it talks about infrastructure, it talks about resilient building, infrastructure and constructions, and likewise. So these are the SDGs wherein you can see what is the current status as per the Niti Aayog assessment reports, and wherein in terms of engineering solution, in terms of better planning solutions, you all can give take research activities and merge these SDGs with the Sendai framework risk mapping or risk assessment needs, or reducing the mortality morbidity needs, or whichever SDG framework target or a priority suits your working profiles. So that can be imbibed. It is also made mandatory that your hospitals and school buildings are also safe. So in terms of school retrofitting, what kind of rapid visual assessment tools can be developed, what kind of quick assessment tools can be developed. There are RVS tools in place, and people are using them in terms of engineering mapping and likewise. But how in our areas we can identify some critical lifeline buildings that are of importance. You look at Delhi as a national capital. Delhi has so many critically important lifeline structures, the parliament, the Delhi secretariat, and likewise there's so many besides your other resources in terms of police headquarters, besides your other support systems in terms of hospitals and etc. But few lifeline structures. So what if these lifeline structure gets hampered or gets stalled for a short duration? The entire country will come to a standstill, right? So what kind of better initiatives can be roped in, can be mainstreamed in these plannings? So as ministry, as departments, as institutional academic institutes, what kind of efforts and initiatives we all can take in to work better? Can I have the next slide? This was something I just wanted to focus in the slide only on what is the concept and the need for mainstreaming on this. This is just a food for thought. You can always debate on it. So there is a negative aspect, there is a positive side to it. Your development can increase vulnerabilities, but your development can also reduce vulnerabilities. How? If you install mitigation, if you install preparedness, if you install preventive measures. Your disaster can cause setback in development. Your disasters can also provide opportunities for development. So all your the Delhi Metro, which is constructed, has a very good early warning system. If there is a slight shaking, or if there is some information about severe rainfalls, or even in terms of earthquakes. So it has those things imbibed in its construction practice, so that they can halt it, they can put it on halt, and people can be moved to safety. They can be asked to evacuate the train. So this is just an example. So disasters, your previous history disasters of your places can give you an opportunity to look for better developmental opportunities. There are many more examples which we can talk about, but what is important is, and some of the best plans that you make, or for you all as academias in the research in the coming years, because there's very less of research and documentations. Even we do not have a lot of good practices of how maybe traditional housing cope with natural hazards or human induced hazards. Do houses in the hills, if they are constructed traditionally, or if they are constructed with the modern today's technology, how they are faring? Can you do a comparative assessment? Just to quote an example. So likewise, you can look up to a lot of developmental aspects from a study assessment perspective, and bring new innovations and advancements to it. I think I'll stop here.
Okay, ma'am.
Can we take questions? Is there any question? I can share you a more detailed PPT also. Sharma sir, अगर आपको चाहिए होगा तो मैं वो भी आपको mail कर or detailed में or elaborated PPT. It would be nice if you all can just go through the entire. This is still a smaller one, but if you go through those slides, it will help you understand and get a clarity of all the terms also. No questions?
Madam, many things that you have told us, these are new for many of us.
Okay, and that's fine. But I hope it was clear. I mean, I hope they could understand.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So
Thank you, madam. Or fundamentally, you are explaining all the concept very clearly, madam. We are much more into gain knowledge from your presentation, madam. Thank you.
I will share a very detailed basic concept presentation wherein each slide like vulnerability, then the different types of vulnerabilities, how vulnerability comes in contact. So you can go through that in very detail and your understanding will get reiterated. So you'll have that understanding more better. All right. So
Yes, ma'am. They are also
Thank you. Thank
giving
you.
messages
Hanji.
that everything is clear to them.
Okay. Thank you. So can I take your leave?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much, ma'am, once again. And it's an
Thank
honor for us that you have delivered a lecture for us.
Thank you so much for giving me that opportunity. It's always nice to come face to face with new set of people and interact. It's always a mutual learning. Thank you so much for having me. Have a good
Th-
day. Be safe.
Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Bye.
Goodbye, ma'am. So participants, now within 10 minutes, we will start again our new session. And if you have any queries, you can mail me. We will send the questions to ma'am and I will revert back once I get the response from ma'am. Will it be okay? If you have any query, please ask me.